Hello, welcome to Cybeats Powerhouse Perspectives. My name is Chris Blask. I'm the VP of Strategy with Cybeats. With me today is the unrepeatable Franky Thrasher, who's been working in nuclear cybersecurity for many, many years with major utility in the EU. Hello, Franky. How are you?
Hi, Chris. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Where the hell are you?
Excuse me?
Where are you?
I am sitting in my office, my home office in Belgium. So a little bit of a different time zone, obviously, from you, as I can see the nice breeze in the background. But yeah, so sitting at home, just got off my day's work and happy to come speak to you.
Well, okay. So, as we were before this, before the interview, we tend to try to look back, present, future, right? So your history is one of these, and again, it's not just no humble brag to this. You've been at this for, some decades. You're working with nuclear cybersecurity, the high consequence stuff, and working with operational technology. And, all I like to rant about that, the seriousness, and people have been building systems for thousands of years, as opposed to, in your case, including cyber folks who've been at it for, 7 days or 40 years or whatnot.
Right.
So looking back over your career, in nuclear cybersecurity, what is that? What have you learned, that you sort of take with you to today about systems reliability, in a mature way, actually keeping things running in the real world, bar nothing?
Well, it's become a much bigger focus subject than it was, I would say, when I started. I like to say, like when we talk about history, we talk about BC and AD, and I like to refer to what was before Stuxnet and after Stuxnet, where things really started becoming, aware of, oh my goodness, there's a whole bunch of things that are out there that are connected that we're not aware of and that can do, have real impact. And what I mean by real impact is there is a tangible effect to disruption. It's not just, oh, I lost an email or the server fell over or I've lost connectivity. It's something physically has stopped turning, moving, or could explode or whatever else just due to bad code. And that had brought a whole new realization. It had brought a whole new approach to the business because these are systems that historically were not designed to be connected and they were thrown into the connected world. And what I mean, for example, they weren't designed to be connected. A typical OT system was a point-to-point system. So, kind of like when we were kids and, instead of a telephone, you'd have two cans and a piece of wire. Well, if that piece of wire was pulled, that the person on the other end, who that is, which, is completely different from a shortwave radio or something like that. And that's literally, I'd say, the difference of what happened in terms of exposing things and how that got out there. So that made it unbelievably more serious and more real in my field. And often people say, well, we just, I got started early enough. We were started well before Stuxnet. And, back then it was a subject. I mean, I wouldn't say we'd get laughed out of the room, but there was, I can remember going to Black Hat, for example, and asking, hey, does anybody here have any information on, industrial control systems, how we can secure them? And people are looking at me going, what exactly are you talking about? Which now, at any major cybersecurity conference today, if you were to say that, people would be like, you're doing a conference and you're not going to talk about reliability of critical infrastructure. That's that would be unheard of. So it's changed a lot in that perspective. It's changed the dynamics of the game, but it has also changed a lot because the first people to get and the most dangerous involved in it have been the nation state actors, like was the case for Stuxnet, and we're certainly seeing a lot more of that today. And there's a correlation. Right now, we're in the middle of something, pretty bad here in Europe in terms of international events. Well, that automatically correlates with alerts and everything from, the different threat intel community agencies we work with in terms of this sort of political tension is happening. Be careful because it'll probably bring, some sort of attack on critical infrastructure of a type. And this is something that we weren't doing before. So yeah, there's a whole different dynamic. It's a whole different thing. It's to a certain extent, I wouldn't say more exciting, but it's a lot more real for people like myself. But it's also something that has become a true subject that I can go to anybody on the C-level suite in my company, and I can get their attention, which I would have probably had to sit down and explain it to them, 10 years ago. So there is that in terms of what we've learned. So.
Right, and you got me thinking about it. Right, Stuxnet was 2010. So we're 12 years past that. I heard an interesting recommendation from an interesting source in 2006 not to pick up USB sticks in certain places. Right, and we're on that path. We've had, there's the next question we have queued up is, based on that, into the present, right? And as you say, we have information sharing and analysis organizations, ISACs, ISOs, in the EU, in the States, with various maturity levels where we're actually communicating these sorts of things at a structured level. We have all the internal corporate structures as that you just touched on. At the C level, you should be able to have these conversations in any sector. And as you get into energy and as you get into nuclear, we have a certain maturity level there at the executive level. We have just the beginning of supply chain security. And shout out to James Nesbitt, who hosted the conversation, like saying before you and I and Marty Edwards and Gear Allred and a couple other people. I realized we had no supply chain security. So now we're 4 years into that, and we have SBOM's software bill of materials mandated by presidential executive order in the States, and how that ripples into the EU, and the supply chain of policy is starting to move. And we have now two world events making us all thinking about supply chain. The last couple of years, with that stack of pandemic and Suez Canal and just logistics. And now, increasingly acting out some of the nation state conflict things that make us worry about this stuff, right? With your hat on, the advising, you're giving to your, peers and reports these days, last couple of years, today, this year, how well set up do you feel? I mean, what are the areas that you feel good or bad about that? Given
In terms of protecting our supply chain and from a cybersecurity perspective, you mean?
Right.
Right.
That's, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
And it would seem to be the big threat today. Obviously the existing threats are there, and you're probably handling pretty well. And this is the new front.
Well, I think we're dealing with it to an extent. I hope we're dealing with it well. It is. I'm not going to say it's a new subject, because here's the thing, and I've said this. I've spoken about this at MIT and other places. It's going to sound really strange to people when I say this, but I have seen nothing new in cybersecurity or in cybersecurity threats over the last 30 years. Okay. The vectors have changed, but it's the same basic things. When you talk about USB sticks, we're still dealing with that. If you look at buffer overflows, which is badly written code, it's been around for 30 years. Huh? You'd think we would be able to fix this, that we would have the same thing. Now, there's reasons for that. Oddly enough, I'll take the example of buffer overflow, and then I'll give you another example that's a little bit outside of code base that should relate to it. When I explain this to people, buffer overflow is, for me today, is a prime example of a modern supply chain attack. And people say, well, how's that? You're talking about, a bad code. It's in there. I said, yeah, but how does that bad code keep getting injected back into the way we're doing it? Well, today we're not writing code the same way we were. If you go back to the COBOL programmers and the guys, 30, 40 years ago, where they really had to be creative and they had books, they didn't have the internet, and they had to figure this out. Today, somebody wants a counter, they want to make something. What do? They go to all these libraries and resources and they copy paste. Oh, but by the way, did that little bit of code they have the right input validation? No. If you use the wrong input validation, you get a buffer overflow. And so in your supply chain, if you will, which is your code, you're actually injecting this back in there. And that's just, okay, are we verifying this from point to point? That is, if I'm looking at it purely from an electronic trail, we're looking at that. But now you have to start looking at supply chain in the same way I would say a business, a supply chain does, a purchasing system and whatnot. And that's where I segue into purchasing. And I'll give you an example of something I've run into. I can't go into detail to, but it's something I've seen happen. I'd say within the last 2 years. There's a case that it was brought to me. I looked into. It was really interesting, where a company was flagged as suspect, not by the cybersecurity people initially, but by the purchasing people, because this company was selling equipment to control. They were controllers that were going to be put into windmill parks, offshore windmill parks, and they were really cheap. And of course, in the model that we have here, we're looking at, but it's sell off to the lowest bidder and what else. But then we started looking into it, and the company didn't look right. And the more they started digging into it, it's like, Why are they selling so cheap? They're literally selling underpriced. I mean, there's no way they could be making a profit. And then we got other people involved in looking into that and the roots of the company. And then we start saying, okay, let's look at the equipment they're selling. And then you take the equipment apart and you find, wow, these were manufactured in a Far Eastern country. And then you start digging a little bit more into it and you find out, well, the chipset doesn't make sense. And there's, backdoors and things that have been really integrated into the hardware that's being undersold because they're thinking if the bidding process is to go out to the lowest bidder, we'll undercut everybody and make sure we can put that. And now we have an access into that. That is a direct supply chain attack that's not really linked to code per se, but it's how can we put something in there that will impact things, because the weakest point that they're looking at there is actually the purchasing process. And that is something you have to start thinking, wait a minute, that's a true cyber attack, but the vector and how we're getting around to it, it's not, oh, I can just verify my code. Now I need to verify my hardware and find out where do we purchase it from? Who's this company? Are they reliable? What's going on? Why are we being pushed to buy this particular brand? And did we've actually verified what they're selling us? And that's an example. This is something that like I said, nation states, they can afford to lose money. They can afford to lose money because their return on investment is the damage that they can create. It's not necessarily but we want to get to market. And so you have to start getting cautious beyond just the techie. Oh, this is my code, I'm verifying it. That part is still unbelievably important, but you have to start making people aware on a much larger process. And luckily, like I said, it was our purchasing people who flagged this, said, yeah, we understand this is cheap, but we really don't, and then got back to our physical security people. And then eventually they got back to us and they said, well, this is something that controls really critical stuff. And so we were way farther down in the process before they actually got to the software part. And they asked us, to look into this. And lo and behold, there was something fishy in Denmark. So there we go. That's an example among others, I would say.
Well, you touched on procurement, and I think it's a great example because, throughout my career, see, dogs are always welcome on every show, right? Now we need to know his name, him or her.
His name is Chief. I'm sorry. I mean, yeah. I'm a little bit of a football fan.
Chief will definitely make the cut. When Anthony puts this together. I mean, the dog value is just we all miss them. Anyways, so you would mention procurement, right? Which is an interesting point in all of this, right? Throughout my career, I've gone through various waves. Firewalls first. I mean, obviously everybody's getting on the internet. You've probably heard me obsessed with inevitability curves. If something's going to happen in the future, there's a line that connects that to the present, in various ways, and it's going to happen. Getting on the internet and having firewalls, SIM, having the AWACS level of visibility and what the heck's going on in your network. First in IT, now pretty pervasive in OT. Threat intelligence, ISACs, that's fairly obvious. And I know I'm at a point in my career that maybe I just want to see a conclusion to this, but I look in supply chain and I'm starting to think we're going to round this out. It's not going to go on forever. The cycles of history aren't going to go on until hell freezes over. There is an end goal that we may achieve that for, your and my professional purposes, will let us change the state, not have the same level of risk, fighting a new set of threats and a new set of fundamentals, but actually perhaps, achieve more reliable, more stable information systems like we have with water and power in general in the first place. However, again, I have biases in this. I'm always trying to figure out, am I missing something? But I see in supply chain security, transparency in information. I need to know what's, it's all situational awareness. And if I can know well enough at the software supply chain level in real time to run nuclear fusion power stations 100 and 1,000 years from now, I should be able to have other sorts of information integrity, that help us break historic cycles of politics and nation state conflicts and all of the conflict, that we're involved in. So what do you think? Is this all leading somewhere? Are we just going to spend the next decade and the next decade and the next decade literally forever, in cyber conflicts and other conflicts, or are we moving the goalpost finally in the end?
Yeah, history does repeat itself in cycles, and it's interesting you would say that because there's one thing I learned off threat intelligence, for example, is that I'll take the case of disinformation, for example. There's nothing new under the sun today. Okay, the way disinformation is being propagated, like by nation states and whatnot. If you look at how things were done, for example, with the KGB and everything during the Cold War era, well, there was infiltration into local newspapers and everything else. It was a lot more complicated, a lot slower, but it's the same basic idea. Get to a trusted news source and start doing that. Today, it's the same basic idea, same basic techniques that are being used, but it can be spread easily over social media or over. It's just the speed and the impact at which you can get out there, you can reach people is a lot quicker. So it is a matter, and it's kind of going back to what we were saying earlier. There's still nothing new under the sun. Do I think that in 100 years from now we're going to be looking at things differently? No, I think the technology around it's going to be different, but it's still going to be the same basic principle. At the end of the day, our biggest weakness, and I can go all the way back to the beginning of my career and the infamous "I love you" virus, which I'm sure you remember as well as fondly as I do. And I tell people, when I do awareness, what is the main vector for propagating, for example, malware? And I said it's literally human gullibility. The technology it's in there. It's somebody like me, back then who receives an email from the secretary, and that says, "I love you." And of course, I don't challenge myself. I don't look in the mirror. I don't think that this is an appropriate work. And, this was what, 25 years ago. And now it's like, oh, but people wouldn't do that today. Really? Have you gone on social media? I mean, Chris, do you ever get all of a sudden at our age, and I like to think I'm handsome and intelligent, but the number of 20-year-old desperate women, that are, just really want to chat with me and have pictures of exchange. It's the basic concept is still the same. The technology has changed, and as long as you're going to have that aspect of it, the eighth layer of the OSI stack, the human layer, or one that's going to be there, then we're going to be able to exploit that in one way or another. And I try to remind people that technology isn't the problem; it's just a tool to exploit a bigger problem. And it comes down to awareness and making sure that the right people know what they're doing, and having the processes and procedures and whatnot. And we're going to have to renew these processes and procedures and rules just on different types of platforms. And it might be with purchasing, it might be with different things, it might be with a way different technology in 30, 40, 50, 100 years. But yeah, I mean, the human gullibility factor, it's, if I take it even go back further than the "I love you" package, and say, well, has this ever happened before in history? You can literally go back, and it's an expression we use today still in computer. You can go back to the Trojan horse. These guys left, and they left us a present after years of trying to fight us. Oh, let's just bring it in and open it and not open it up. It's the same exploitation of that human frailty, or vulnerability and gullibility that we're going to be able to do. So no, I don't see there being big changes in that sense. I think that because of that, I think we have job security and the next generation as well. But it is going to come down to, I think, maybe at some point, what could be a change factor in that could make things differently is if for the cybersecurity field specifically, and I know it sounds strange, but it's something I thought about repeatedly, if we integrated a little bit more of soft skill understanding rather than just the high tech skills, which of course we like to do, we're geeks and everything else, but understanding what makes people tick, what makes it from a psychological perspective, that if I come up to you, Chris, and as you're going to your ATM machine, and I'm wearing my nicest suit, and I say, "Hi, I'm Franky. I'm from your bank. I need your, something's happened. I need your PIN code and your credit card number." You're going to laugh me away, and most people would. And yet there is this detachment that comes along when it's on a screen where, oh, okay, that looks credible. Let me click and do that. There's a certain percentage of the population that falls into that. And I think at some point, if we delve a little bit deeper, instead of just we need better technology. No, because the technology is we're going to have better technology. That's inevitable, but we need a better understanding of how we use technology and what makes us tick. Because at the end of the day, just like with normal programming, outside of cybersecurity, if you ask the hardest part for any average programmer, it's handling human errors. What happens if somebody inputs something that isn't correct? How do we react? That's literally that's pure soft skills and understanding how people work to be able to protect them from themselves. So.
Well, and you're sitting there in your home office and music studio as a serious guitar thrasher. You're a very good musician. And as we're talking about before the interview part section of this, Anthony, our producer, is a music event producer, and because of the pandemic, we're lucky to have him available for us. And you may well be right, but I'm going to bring up flying cars and expectations and timelines on the influence campaign disinformation issue we're dealing with right now. And I think it applies to the rest of it. And if I'm not wrong, I think all of the cybersecurity stuff, but particularly the supply chain things going through now, may actually help us to inflect those cycles, because we think that we have Zoom so we can have webinars, because what the heck, we've got a bunch of engineers and we can put a calendar invite out there and everybody will be fine. But Anthony knows, and and anybody who works in the music industry, anybody who's worked on the back of television cameras know, you need to create an environment that humans can provide interaction and value in. We built the internet because we're engineers, and we'll just put stucco on the wall with a spray gun, screw it, right? And we're yet to really involve the human element. Flying cars, there's a lot of people of a given age who say, I was promised a flying car. It's like, maybe not in your lifetime, but turns out we're getting flying cars kind of about now, and will happen over the next couple of decades. And I think, and I'm hoping, that what we're building with, cyber is just information. If we can have certainty around information enough to run nuclear plants and do these things, maybe we can inflect some of that out so that everybody can have some idea of, at least vaguely what to believe in or not. We're not talking kumbaya, but no one wants to, the victims of disinformation, most of them just believe they're right. It's hard to sort things out. Maybe we can help.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can't, you can't fix the human element. I think there is a something I've been talking about, because I do some volunteer work here with local high schools and whatnot. Parents a little bit aware of cybersecurity risks for their kids and social media and whatnot. And I tell them that I leave with the premise: it doesn't matter how well educated you are, how well this comes on. It's down to what you want to believe. And one of the things we are missing in our society today, and that's a larger problem than just cybersecurity, is the fact, and it's happened. I've helped teenagers, I've helped older men, I've helped ladies who got caught up in stuff, family members and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I tell them, the problem is we have a problem which is not technologically related. It's how we consume information. And there was an old saying, I can't remember. I think it was George Carlin in one of his stand-up comedies, who says, learning to read or write is not important. Children will learn to read or write and whatnot. Learning how to question what they read is unbelievably important, to look for sources and whatnot. Even though I've explained that, people don't do that. And also, when I talk about the human frailty element, I'll make this parallel with what I do with classes or with schools. I was doing this with some parents not too long ago, and I told them two things that really shocked them, that shock value. I said, before I start, I want you guys to understand I have teenagers at the house, and there's two things that you need to understand, okay? Your teenagers are all morons. And they all go, oh my goodness. And I said, and of course they are. And if you don't know, and if that shocks you, think about how smart you were at that age and the dumb stuff that we did at that age. They are unfortunately much more exposed to it than we are because of the technological element. But it's the same basic idea. I'm sure, Chris, you did some crazy stuff that you're thankful that we don't have. You don't have cameras and evidences from that era, and that's just human nature. And I said, and the other thing is perception. We're going to be influenced by what we want to believe. And there was a lady there who was explaining that, how I said, understand that things happen because it's human nature, and you can't get ahead of that. And she literally 3 minutes later was telling me about how her son, who was 13, and she was completely shocked, but because she caught the kid, probably going to this or that porn site, and she was like, And then she says, but it's not him, he learned this from somebody in school. And I'm like, when you were 13, or when your husband was 13, did he ever happen to go to the local gas station because at the mechanics would leave Playboys in the restrooms? It's the same thing. But once again, it goes back to that tool is there. And this is so much the case that goes back and back and back and all these different things. Like I said, nothing new under the sun. It's just a matter of getting people to understand and to question things. And like I think one of the things I would say in the nuclear industry I've seen that has been so amazing to me, the best return on investment I have, and I'll give you two cases I had in my own industry here recently. One is we had a threat intel report come in, a couple of weeks ago, something big that was going to happen. And I emailed, our plant managers and our top management saying, okay, we're on top of this. Yes, we're seeing it. Some companies have been impacted, not us, blah, blah, blah. But if I do see something, I won't hesitate to take the plants offline. I've got a mechanism to where I can quickly take them offline from any outbound communications, internet, or anything else. Now, these two plant managers, in our management, they said, okay, fine, Frankie, do what you have to. Because we've had so many conversations and so many evidences, I've pointed and repeated this over to them. And people are like shocked by this. I said, no, it's because their focus is the plant has to run. The old, go back to the Dune era, the spice must flow. The plant has to run. The internet is secondary to them. And they trust me in my judgment on that, where if I had told them this, 15 years ago, I have to take the plant offline, which I've never had to, but we have the possibility to do it very quickly if we need to, because we want to avoid a ransomware or anything else that can impact. Then we can do that. And once again, the return on investment there it's the trust factor. It's the fact that we have built the awareness level within our C level to a certain to a point where, okay, this is important. It needs to be part of our decision process. And then you change how the mindset works. Our own CEO, speaking of James of Nesbitt, when he hired me here, he actually flew out to watch me speak at a conference on. I'm sure you remember him. He was there at the conference I was speaking at on nuclear cybersecurity.
Right.
He took a day out to fly out just to hear my speech because he wants to know how this is going to impact. Is this important? This is something that was unheard of on that level. Yeah, you would have had maybe the IT guys, maybe some of the automation guys, but certainly not a C-level guy. But yeah, this is becoming more and more true, and and they understand that, and that's where you shift. Once that part of it, you've got that kind of return on investment where people are questioning decisions that come up in front of them and saying, "Wait a minute. Is this safe? Is this secure? How is this going to impact our reliability? Let's let's get a go from our experts if we go forward." Then it's that will be the changing factor. It's not going to be any piece of magic or magic equipment or process. It'll be the fact that on the decision level, it's part of the thought process to let's check this before we do anything else.
Right. So, with that in hand, we have drivers in front of us that are going to keep pushing us in that direction. You and I have seen enough of it. 15 years ago, as you just said, you couldn't get that sort of executive response. Now you can, because yes, security and everybody cares about these things, but you have somebody there in a role whose responsibility is to keep the bloody plant on, right? And we've gone to that level, and any other organization that's not at this point 15 years ago, or in the nuclear space, literally anywhere today, won't make it. So almost all of them will. So we'll continue down that path. And whether I'm right, that we may actually make some changes that, maybe I'm still young enough to see play out in my life or not out of all this effort, we'll see. But the lights are still on today. So thank you for that, Franky. Thank you for your time now, all the time we spent together and everything you've done for the
and the time we'll spend together in the future. I'm sure we'll have many other opportunities to exchange. It's always a pleasure, Chris.
You're always welcome on the boats.
I'm on my way.
Awesome.
I'll bring one of my guitars.
There you go. I broke mine. I gotta get another one. All right. Thank you, folks. Be good.
Thanks so much.